So this is a daily movement routine that you can follow along to. I designed this specifically for the needs of hikers, so we're addressing commonly tight and weak muscles that we see in hikers. You won't need any equipment, just a yoga mat will make things a little bit more comfortable, and we're going to perform this barefoot because having nice strong feet is very important as a hiker. That's about it. Let's get into it. So we'll begin on all fours in this movement called a cat-cow. This is designed to address tightness in your thoracic spine, which is like your mid to upper back. And we're going to start on hands and knees and think about elongating the spine, so pushing your head towards the top of the mat and simultaneously try and pull your hips backwards towards your feet, so we get this kind of lengthening feel. Now, if you find yourself with lower back pain or tightness in your upper back, then doing this on the daily is really going to help. And here we're performing 8 really nice, slow, thorough reps of the cat-cow. So we're going to be moving through this pattern of just arching your back, so it's really as challenging as you make it. If this seems really easy, I encourage you to press your hands and your knees and feet into the mat to try and create some more pressure. Because the aim here is to move very thoroughly. So try to move just one vertebral segment at a time, and we're really going to be focusing all of our attention on our back that way. So I like to imagine having a line of dots running from my belly button all the way through to my head, and one at a time I try and bring those dots upwards towards the sky, so starting with the belly button and then moving slowly up the back and eventually towards the head and neck. So once you've reached a point where you can't possibly arch anymore, that's where you really want to press your hands and knees and feet into the floor to see if you can just gain that extra fraction of an inch more in upwards movement. Hold that for a second, and then we can relax a little and begin to move in the opposite direction again, starting with the belly and then following through with the upper body in the same way that you came up. So this is very much a beginner's routine. In the Elements program, we have a breakdown of this routine, but also the next step in the process, which is a little more advanced. So if you haven't checked it out yet, it's my most affordable program, and it's an excellent starting point for your training if you like my kind of approach to getting as prepared as possible for the mountains. Definitely check it out. Now to finish this off, I'm going to hold the upper and lower positions for about 10 seconds each, just to really help solidify our strength in those end ranges of motion. Next, we're going to work on some hip mobility with this move called hip swivels. So sit on the ground with your hands behind you and your knees bent at about 90 degrees. Initiate the movement by abducting the hip. So that essentially means moving the knee away from the midline of the body. So we're actively pulling it down towards the floor using the muscles in your butt, the glutes. You might not get far in these first few reps, but just go as far as you can, and make sure that you only go as far as you can whilst keeping the pelvis, the sitting bones in your butt, keep them completely in contact with the floor. Don't lift them up off the floor yet. We'll get to that in a second. But for now, I want you to maintain the pressure within the glutes on the floor and actively engage those muscles in pulling the knee out sideways. Keep the heel and the toes on the ground as you move internally, rotating the knee inwards. So I'm going through 10 reps of both internal and external rotation, and then we'll switch to the other side. So with all of these moves, you can go through them really passively and not feel much, but the more that you concentrate, the more that you focus, and the more effort that you put in, the harder they become. So even by doing this routine that seems like it's just doing dynamic stretching, you can activate more musculature to be able to gain greater range of motion, control, and strength. And the same goes for body weight training. If you're not using weights, you can always actively engage more muscle just by focusing on the movement and going deeper into your range of motion by focusing. So now we're moving into a slightly different variation, which is much more relaxed, much more free-flowing, and we can now allow that butt to come off the floor. So you still want to keep your toes and your hips on the ground as you move through this internal and external rotation, but it's just much more of a free-flowing version of this movement, and it's much more relaxing than the first version. Increasing your hip mobility is important not only for preventing injury from slips and falls over difficult terrain, but it also allows you to move into a greater range of motion where you can build strength. And if you're strong in a greater range of motion, you're going to be much more capable and much more confident in what you're doing in the mountains. So that's why we're doing all these movements. Our next move is the hip hinge, and this is the bilateral version, so using two legs. The idea with this movement is to bring your head as low as possible to the ground without bending either your knees or your back. So the priority must be on maintaining good upper body posture, meaning that you keep your chest out and your shoulders back through the entire movement. And my preferred way to do this is just by folding my arms behind my lower back. And that means that I naturally prevent my shoulders from rolling forward. And I also get a bit of feedback from my arms because I can kind of feel the muscles in my lower back starting to move as I arch. And as soon as I feel that arch in my back, that's a signal for me that I'm going far enough in the movement. And you might not be able to get to parallel like I am, but over time you will develop more length in the hamstrings, which will enable you to do that. If you're hypermobile in the knees, perhaps just keep a slight bend. Some other things to keep in mind is that you want to keep your feet in the game here as well. So the muscles should be active and responsive as you move. I like to think about gripping the ground with my toes and maintaining a really strong arch in the foot throughout this movement. So our next move is all about the calves. This is the down dog pedal. So this is also a hamstring stretch in a way because we're focusing on mobilizing the posterior chain. So that's a sequence of muscles, tendons and ligaments that run up and down the backside of your body from your heel to your head. But more specifically with this movement, we're addressing tightness in the calves, which is a fairly common area of tightness, especially for hikers and runners. So maintaining a straight back in this position is going to be difficult for most of us, myself included, but the priority here will be on straightening that one knee at a time, pushing the heel towards the ground in order to get that nice calf stretch. As a side note, this is a great opportunity in this move to get to know your shoulders and become a little more comfortable and familiar with this inverted position, which is hugely beneficial for your shoulders and your upper body strength and health in general. So really try and grip the ground with your fingers, draw your shoulder blades down and back, and sink into being comfortable in that position, elbows locked out. If you do have really tight calves, I'd recommend adding some other static calf stretches, perhaps from my ankle mobility routine that you can see up here in the top right hand corner. But here, we're simply bringing awareness to how tight these muscles are and giving them a gentle reminder that we need more length in the muscle. And much like every other move in this routine, this is best done every day and it's best done nice and slow. Here we'll take a little rest before we get into our next move, which is the 1 foot balance. Okay, this might look like it's a very basic exercise, but I encourage you to try it out because I've got a couple of different variations that you can try. And here we're going to slowly bring 1 foot up off the ground, and you want to try and bring the knee up as high as possible. Keep it up above hip height if you can, but if you can't, keep on working on it, and over time you'll be able to get it a little bit higher and build up more balance and control in this movement. So here we're engaging all the muscles in the lower leg, stabilizing the ankle, the knee, and at the same time building some strength in the hip flexors as well. Now I'm holding here for a minute, but just do your best. If you can only get to 15 or 20 seconds, that's okay. Just hold for as long as you can. Feel free to come back in if you lose your balance. So here I'm really paying attention to what's happening in my hips throughout this movement. Often you'll notice that the hips will sway out to one side, or your upper body will overcompensate by leaning over. So just keep an eye on that. So that's a minute. Now we'll switch to the other side. So by performing this drill, this is going to go a long way to improving your balance and stability, which in turn will likely minimize the chance of you falling on the trail or just life in general, I guess, and also should minimize the severity of the fall because we're training your proprioception, which is the relationship between your mind and your body. And also we're training your reaction speed from being a little off balance here as well. So it's a really beneficial movement, especially if you're a hiker. Now, if this seems super easy for you, try it with your eyes closed, or you could even try extending that raised knee so the foot is right out in front of you. And that's going to be really a much more challenging variation for you to try out. And here I'm gripping the ground with my toes, trying to keep them active and keep my foot in an active arch while I'm going through this balancing move. There's lots of different things you can do with this movement to make it more challenging. Use your imagination. Okay, our next move is this ankle mobility drill, and the aim here is to get an idea of exactly where you're at with your ankle dorsiflexion. So that's the action of pushing the knee forward over the toes. And as you can probably imagine, that's a super important movement to aid in uphill locomotion as well as just normal walking, hiking and running. And what I'm doing here is placing my big toe at around a hand width distance from the wall, or in this case a door, and I'm moving the knee towards the glass whilst trying to make sure that I keep my heel planted firmly on the floor or the mat. And sometimes you'll see that it comes up a bit. That's just me kind of testing the waters, testing my range of motion a little. So if my knee can easily reach the glass, then I'll move my foot slightly backwards in order to find a more challenging range of motion to work within. And where you feel this movement will give you an idea on where you're tight in the lower leg. So you might feel it in the calf, you might feel it in the ankle joint itself, or even in the muscles in the front of the leg like tibialis anterior. And in general, if you can reach the wall with your knee when your big toe is a hand distance or more away from the wall, you're doing okay with your ankle mobility. But in my case, although I can do that, I'm looking to build more ankle mobility so that I can move into more complex bodyweight movements like the pistol squat and other variations like that. And that way, when I'm training here on my balcony in quarantine, I don't have to rely so much on adding weights to movements. And I can stay out of the gym, I can train my functional bodyweight strength right here on my balcony with absolutely no equipment. And so what you end up with is just a more minimalist approach to preparing your body for the mountains. So here I'm performing 20 to 30 reps on each side, and as you can see, when I'm towards the end of my range of motion, I'm holding for a second or two, then coming back, straightening the knee back to the starting position. One thing that's important with this movement is that you don't want to allow the knee to cave inwards. Often you'll have stronger muscles on one side of the leg which will cause the knee to cave inwards. So you want to be thinking about driving the knee over the second and third toes, so just slightly outwards. And that's generally the way that you want the knee moving. Over the toe, we're always a bit stronger in external rotation, so try and prevent the knee from caving inwards while you're doing this movement, or any other lower body movement for that matter. But if you already have really strong and mobile ankles, there's no real need for you to do this drill every day. This routine is designed to address the most common movement-related issues that hikers face, and this is a really common one. So if your ankles are sweet, feel free to swap this movement or any other movement for that matter in this routine with something that you find more challenging. I really encourage you to take this concept and make it your own. Okay, we're going to get into the final move of this daily movement practice for hikers, and that is this deep squat. So here we're pulling together all of the things that we've already worked on, such as ankle and hip mobility, in order to become more comfortable in this deep squat position. And being able to get into and stay in this position is a really good representation of good overall functional body in your lower joints. And this is certainly something that's missing from Western culture. And if you've travelled much outside of the Western world, particularly to developing nations, like if you've been trekking in India or Nepal, maybe even Peru or Bolivia, you might already know why this position is so important to master. So my tips for you, if you are struggling getting into this squat, are to start by elevating your heels. Perhaps you'd like to fold the yoga mat over a couple of times, maybe use some books or some small weight plates maybe, and that will give you some false range of motion in your ankles, and it may allow you to get deeper into the squat. And if that helps you, then you know that ankle mobility then is an issue that you should keep working on. And so the previous ankle mobility drill would be a good one. But also just sitting in this position, even if you're elevating your heels like that, you are going to see improvement over time if it's done regularly. And if you like, I've got a couple of other videos that are dedicated to helping you improve your squat. I'll link them up here in the top right hand corner. The squat mobility complex, I think, is probably the best video for you to check out if you're having trouble getting into this position right now. So check that out. And maybe you're wondering if it's really necessary to work on this deep range of motion. You might feel like this is overkill for something like hiking, and maybe you're right, but if you want to take on steeper, more challenging terrain in the future, then you might need that extra range of motion one day. And for that reason, I like to prioritize quality of movement and working in a deep range of motion over simply increasing how much weight I can push in a leg press or even in the squat itself. And the squat really is one of the most crucial movements for us to master. I'm not even going to try to cover all of the complexities that come along with finding the right type of squat variation that suits your body in this video. That's a 10-minute video in itself that is included in Elements. But for now, what I'm going to do is what I usually do after performing my morning movement routine, and that is just to sit and to focus on my breathing for 5 minutes or so. And I guess you could call this meditation if you want to, but in reality it's just sitting down, paying attention to your breathing and listening to what's happening within your body. And if you plan on doing a hike at altitude, paying more attention to the frequency and the quality of your breath is something that could definitely help. So I encourage you to try this. So with that said, we're going to sit down, eyes closed if you like, or you can enjoy this view of Montserrat and simply pay attention to your breath and bring your attention into your body as we do a little breathing technique that's called box breathing. So just focusing on the breath seems like an easy task, but you might notice that it's not that easy. So I wanted to share with you something that might help. This is box breathing. So for 4 seconds, we're going to go through each phase of the breath. So breathing in for 4 seconds, holding the breath for 4 seconds, exhaling for 4 seconds, and holding empty lungs for 4 seconds. So inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4. Feel free to continue on your own, and if you need a little bit of guidance with the breath, you'll find that on the screen in front of you. Draw your attention in towards your body now. We're going to perform a body scan. So bring all your attention to the top of your head. Feel what your forehead feels like. What sensations do you feel in your eyebrows? Is your face relaxed? What sensations do you feel in your ears, in your jaw? Is it tense? Is your neck tight? Where are your shoulders positioned? Feel how the chest changes as you breathe in and out. Continue down on your own, all the way to the end of your toes, just bringing attention to each part of the body, each joint, every muscle, to gain some awareness of how your body is. So as we come towards the end of this practice, recognize how good you feel right now and give yourself a pat on the back for putting in the effort to move your body today. And just remember, as this new day starts, everything you need to become who you want to be, you've already got. You were born ready.